Ayo rose slowly and faced them. "You should not stand so close," she said quietly. Akello smirked. "Or what?" Ayo held her gaze. "Sen follow those who mock the dead." For a moment, just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Akello's face. Then Alaro shoved Ayo's shoulder. The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Mary frowned. "Don't say that. It's true." "No." Mr. Matovu smiled sadly. "My little girl, nobody lives forever." Mary looked down. She hated conversations like these. The loss of their mother years ago still haunted her. Seeing the sadness in her eyes, Mr. Matovu reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere soon." "Promise?" "I promise." She finally smiled. The conversation moved on. Soon they were laughing again. Outside, however, another conversation was taking place. Near the parking area stood two of Mr. Matovu's relatives, his younger brothers. They watched the family through the dining room window. One of them clicked his tongue. "Look at them." "What about them?" "The children." The other man shrugged. "What about them?" "They've become too comfortable." The second man laughed. "Wouldn't you be comfortable if you lived here?" "It's not right." "Why?" "They don't know struggle." He watched Michael laughing with his sisters. "Everything has been handed to them." The other man nodded slowly. "And one day all this wealth will belong to them." The first man's eyes narrowed. "Exactly." Neither man noticed the bitterness creeping into his voice. Years of watching Mr. Matovu grow richer had planted seeds of jealousy in many hearts, seeds that would soon grow into something ugly. Inside the mansion, the children remained blissfully unaware. For them, life was perfect. School, family, comfort, and love. Nothing suggested the storm waiting beyond the horizon. After breakfast, the family walked outside together. The driver stood waiting beside a shiny black vehicle. "Have a good day, children," Mr. Matovu said. "You too, Papa," Irene replied. Mary hugged him tightly. Michael extended his hand. Instead of shaking it, Mr. Matovu pulled him into an embrace. The teenager froze. His father rarely hugged him these days. "Papa?" The old man smiled. "You're growing too fast." Michael laughed. "You sound old." "I am old." "No, you're not," Mr. Matovu chuckled. Then he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Take care of your sisters." Michael nodded. "Always." The old man's eyes lingered on him for a moment, as though memorizing the face of his son. Then he stepped back. The children entered the vehicle. As the car pulled away, they waved through the window. Mr. Matovu waved back. None of them knew it, but this ordinary morning would soon become one of their most treasured memories, because fate was already preparing to test the Matovu family in ways they could never imagine. The Matovu mansion was alive with activity. It was Saturday, which meant no school for the children and a rare day when Mr. Matovu was home instead of traveling between his businesses. The compound buzzed with workers tending to the gardens while the aroma of roasted meat drifted from the outdoor kitchen. Inside the living room, Mary sat curled up on a sofa with another book. Irene was helping Michael solve a puzzle from the newspaper. "You're doing it wrong," Irene said confidently. Michael rolled his eyes. "How can I be doing it wrong when I'm the one solving it?" "Because you're thinking like a boy." "What does that even mean?" "It means you're making it complicated," Michael laughed. "And you're making it sound easy." "Because it is easy." Before he could respond, Mary suddenly looked up. Visitors. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the compound. A few moments later, several cars pulled into the driveway. Relatives. Irene groaned immediately. "Oh no." "What?" Michael asked. "It's Uncle Musa." Mary shut her book. "And Aunt Florence." Michael sighed. "Behave yourselves." "We always behave." That's exactly what people say before causing trouble. The front door opened. Several relatives entered carrying gifts and wearing broad smiles. At the center of them were Mr. Matovu's younger brothers, Musa and Godfrey. Both men smiled warmly when they saw the children. "Michael," Musa exclaimed. The teenager stood respectfully. "Good afternoon, Uncle. Look at you, growing taller every day." Godfrey laughed. "Soon you'll be taller than all of us." The adults exchanged greetings. To anyone watching, it appeared to be a happy family gathering. But beneath the smiles, resentment quietly lingered. Hours later, lunch was served outside beneath a large tent. The family sat together, eating and talking. Mr. Matovu was telling another one of his famous stories. "When I started my first business, I had only 50,000 shillings. His nephews stared in disbelief. "That's impossible." Mr. Matovu laughed. "It is not impossible. How did you survive? By spending wisely." The children listened attentively. Musa watched from across the table. His smile remained fixed, but inside jealousy twisted like a snake. He had heard these stories countless times. What bothered him was not that his brother had become wealthy. What bothered him was that everyone treated Matovu like a hero, as if he were the only man in the family who mattered, as if he alone deserved respect. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Musa and Godfrey remained behind. They sat outside beneath a mango tree while servants cleared dishes. Their eyes followed Mr. Matovu as he played football with Michael and several cousins. Laughter echoed across the compound. The old businessman was smiling like a young man. Godfrey shook his head. "Sometimes I wonder how he does it." "Does what?" "Everything." Musa snorted. "You're still impressed by him?" "Shouldn't I be?" The older brother remained silent. Godfrey continued. "He built all this from nothing." Musa's expression darkened. "That's what everyone says." "Because it's true." Musa leaned forward. "Do you know what annoys me?" "What?" "The worship." Godfrey frowned. "Worship?" "Everyone worships him." "Nobody worships him." "They do." He pointed toward the football field. "Look at them." The children were laughing as Mr. Matovu pretended to chase them. "Those children think their father hangs the moon." Godfrey shrugged. "Can you blame them?" "No." Musa's voice hardened. "But one day they'll learn the world doesn't work that way." He watched Michael carefully. The boy was confident, educated, respected. Everything Musa wished his own son was. "My son wakes up at 5 every morning to help in the shop," he muttered. "Michael wakes up and finds breakfast waiting for him." Godfrey sighed. "You're comparing different lives." "No, I'm comparing spoiled children to hardworking ones." Godfrey stared at him. "You really believe that? Don't you?" The younger brother hesitated. "Michael seems responsible." "Because he's pretending." Godfrey laughed. "You're impossible." But Musa wasn't laughing. His resentment had been growing for years. Every new car, every new business, every new success, each achievement felt like a reminder of his own failures. "One day," Musa said quietly, "those children will inherit everything." Godfrey remained silent. The companies, the land, the houses, the money. His jaw tightened. "And what about the rest of us?" Godfrey looked uncomfortable. "We have our own lives." Musa laughed bitterly. "Do we?" Before Godfrey could answer, a shadow appeared behind them. Both men turned. "Mr. Matovu." The brothers immediately straightened. "Talking about me?" he asked with a smile. Musa forced a laugh. "When do we ever stop?" Mr. Matovu sat beside them. "You know, if you're discussing my businesses, you should at least invite me." The three brothers laughed. For a moment, things felt normal. Then Mr. Matovu noticed the serious look in Musa's eyes. "What's bothering you?" "Nothing." "You're a terrible liar." Godfrey chuckled. "He's been complaining again." Musa glared at him. Mr. Matovu smiled. "About what?" Godfrey answered before Musa could stop him. "The children." Mr. Matovu raised an eyebrow. "What about them?" Musa crossed his arms. "They've had life too easy." Silence followed. Mr. Matovu looked toward the field where Irene and Mary were now chasing butterflies. Michael stood nearby watching over them. His face softened. "They've suffered enough." Musa frowned. "Suffered?" "Their mother died." The words instantly killed the conversation. Musa looked away. Even now, years later, mentioning her still carried pain. Mr. Matovu continued quietly. "I promised her I would give them the best life possible, and you've certainly done that. I intend to continue." Musa shook his head. "The world isn't kind." "I know." "Then why shield them from it?" Mr. Matovu smiled. "Because the world will eventually show itself." The old businessman looked at his daughters. "Why should I rush their pain?" Neither brother answered. Mr. Matovu stood. "One day life will test them." His eyes moved toward Michael. "And when that day comes, I pray I have taught them enough." He walked away, leaving his brothers beneath the tree. For several moments neither man spoke. Finally Godfrey sighed. "He's right." Musa stared at the mansion, at the expensive vehicles, at the workers, at everything his brother possessed. His eyes narrowed. "No." "What do you mean?" "He's wrong." Godfrey frowned. "About what?" Musa's voice dropped. "Those children have no idea how lucky they are." He looked toward Michael, the future heir, the boy who would one day inherit everything. A dangerous thought crept into Musa's heart, a thought he had never dared speak aloud. The afternoon sun bathed the Matovu mansion in a warm golden glow. From the balcony of his bedroom, Mr. Matovu stood quietly watching his children below. Mary sat beneath a palm tree reading one of her books. Irene was arguing passionately with Michael about something neither seemed willing to surrender. As usual, Michael was trying to keep the peace. "You always think you're right," he told Irene, "because I usually am." "That's not true." "It is." "It isn't." Mary looked up from her book. "I think Michael is right." Irene threw her hands into the air. "See, that's because she's your favorite." Michael laughed. "I don't have favorites." "Yes, you do." "No." "Yes." Mr. Matovu smiled as he watched them. For a moment, all he heard was their laughter, and suddenly he was no longer standing on the balcony. He was 6 years in the past. The hospital room smelled of medicine. Machines beeped softly around the bed. His wife's face had become pale and weak, far too weak for a woman who had once filled every room with life. Mr. Matovu sat beside her, holding her hand. He refused to let go, as though letting go would somehow allow death to take her. She smiled weakly. "You look terrible." He laughed, despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm not the one in a hospital bed." "You haven't slept." "I'll sleep when you're better." Her smile faded. Both of them knew she wasn't getting better. The silence that followed was unbearable. "Matovu." His voice cracked. "Don't. You need to listen." "No." She squeezed his hand. "Please." Tears filled his eyes. She looked toward the door. "How were the children?" Michael had been 11, Irene 9, Mary was barely 5. They keep asking when you'll come home. A tear escaped her eye. My babies. They need you. No. She shook her head weakly. They need us. The words shattered him. For the first time, he realized she had accepted what he couldn't. She was leaving, and there was nothing he could do. Her breathing became shallow. Promise me something. Anything. Raise them to be good people. I will. Not rich people. He nodded through tears. Good people. I promise. She smiled. And don't let them forget me. You'll tell them yourself. But she didn't answer. Instead, she whispered one final thing. Something he would carry for the rest of his life. Love them enough for both of us. The memory faded. Mr. Matovu blinked away tears. Even after 6 years, speaking her name still hurts. Every achievement, every birthday, every school event. There was always an empty chair beside him, one that nobody could fill. A knock interrupted his thoughts. He turned. Musa entered the balcony carrying a cup of coffee. There you are. Mr. Matovu forced a smile. What do you want? I came to save you from your loneliness. I'm not lonely. Musa followed his gaze. The children were still laughing below. Mr. Matovu already knew what was coming. It was a conversation they had been having for years. You should remarry. There it was, again. No. Matovu. No. Listen to me. I've listened for 6 years. Musa sighed. You need a wife. I had a wife. You know what I mean. Mr. Matovu's expression hardened. I don't want another wife. The children need a mother. They had one. They need one now. The businessman shook his head. No woman can replace their mother. Nobody is asking her to. That's exactly what you're asking. Musa sat down. You can't spend the rest of your life alone. Mr. Matovu laughed softly. Why not? Because it's unhealthy. No. His eyes remained on his children. What's unhealthy is bringing a stranger into their lives because people think I should. Musa fell silent. Mr. Matovu's voice softened. I made a promise. What promise? To their mother. The answer ended the conversation. Musa knew there was no arguing with promises made to the dead. A few weeks later, school holidays finally arrived. The children celebrated as though they had been released from prison. Books were thrown aside. Alarms were forgotten. For the first time in months, they could relax. That evening, the family gathered in the living room. Mr. Matovu sat in his favorite chair while Michael occupied the couch with his sisters. I have news. The children immediately looked up. Irene narrowed her eyes. Good news or bad news? Depends. I hate that answer. Mr. Matovu laughed. I have to travel. Mary's smile disappeared. For how long? 3 months. The room became quiet. 3 months was a very long time, especially for children who adored their father. 3 months? Irene repeated. Unfortunately, Mary looked devastated. That's forever. It isn't. It is. The old man chuckled. It'll pass quickly. It won't. Michael noticed Mary's eyes becoming watery. He quickly placed an arm around her. Hey. She looked up. You'll survive. No. You will. No. He smiled. I'll keep you busy. That earned a small smile. Mr. Matovu continued. Since I'll be away, some of your cousins will stay with you during the holidays. The reaction was immediate. Irene groaned. Oh no. Mr. Matovu laughed. What now? Do they have to? They're family. Irene muttered something under her breath. Michael kicked her foot. Behave. I'm just saying. Family is important. Irene rolled her eyes. Michael sounded exactly like their father. As usual, Mary could still remember that holiday more clearly than almost any other. not because it was fun, but because it taught her something. At 11 years old, she had believed all cousins were friends. She quickly learned otherwise. At first, everything seemed normal. Their cousins arrived smiling, laughing, playing games, eating together. But little by little, the comments began. Small things, things adults never noticed, things children understood perfectly. That afternoon, Mary sat quietly reading when one of her cousins, Brian, snatched the book from her hands. "What are you reading now?" He looked at the cover, then laughed. "Of course," Mary frowned. "Give it back." "Why do you always read?" "Because I like books." "You don't do anything else." The other children laughed. "She's weird. She's a baby." Mary lowered her eyes. She hated being laughed at. Another cousin pointed toward the mansion. "You people don't even know how to do anything." "What do you mean?" "You've never washed clothes." Mary remained silent. It was true. "We can if we want to." The children burst into laughter. "No, you can't." "Can too." "Then wash these." One cousin threw a dirty shirt at her. The others laughed again. Mary felt her cheeks burn. That evening she told Michael. He listened quietly, then smiled. "They were teasing. It wasn't funny. I know. They think we're spoiled." Michael sighed. The word had followed them for years. Spoiled, pampered, soft. Children who had never suffered. He hated hearing it, not because it hurt him, but because one day his sisters would believe it. Michael knelt before Mary. "Listen to me." She looked up. "You don't need to prove anything to anybody." "But, no." His voice was gentle. "People will always have something to say, but they laugh at us." Michael smiled. "Then let them laugh." Mary stared at him. "How?" "Because one day you'll become an engineer." Her eyes widened. "And then?" "Then you'll build things they can't even understand." A small smile appeared. Michael pointed at her book. "So, keep reading." She nodded, and for the first time that day, she felt better. From the doorway, Mr. Matovu watched the exchange silently. Pride filled his heart. His son was becoming a good man, a protector, a leader, exactly the kind of man he hoped he would be. Yet somewhere deep inside him, a strange uneasiness stirred, as though life was moving too perfectly, as though something was waiting just beyond the horizon, watching, patiently, and preparing to change everything. 3 months. That was how long Mr. Matovu would be away. At first, the children counted the days. Mary marked them on a calendar hanging in the kitchen. Every evening she crossed out another square. "Only 68 days left," she would announce. Then 50, then 30, then 10. The house felt emptier without their father. Though he called every night, it wasn't the same. Michael had naturally assumed the role of head of the house. He checked Mary's homework, made sure Irene revised daily, oversaw the servants and handled the money for shopping for the home. He assumed the role of the man of the house. One evening during a video call, Mr. Matovu smiled proudly. "You've grown into quite the man." Michael grinned. "I'm trying." "No." The old man shook his head. "You're succeeding." Michael glanced away shyly. Compliments from his father still embarrassed him. Mary jumped into view. "When are you coming home?" "Soon." "You always say that," Mr. Matovu laughed. "Because it's true." "Promise?" "I promise." Those words made her smile. None of them knew it would be a promise fate would never allow him to keep. The day Mr. Matovu returned, the entire household was excited. The servants rushed around preparing his favorite meals. Mary practically camped near the front gate. Every few minutes she asked the guards the same question. "Has Papa arrived?" "No, young miss." 10 minutes later. "Now?" "No." 20 minutes later. "Now?" The guards laughed. "No." When the black SUV finally rolled into the compound, Mary screamed loud enough to alert the entire neighborhood. "He's here!" She sprinted toward the vehicle. Michael and Irene followed close behind. The driver stepped out first. Then Mr. Matovu emerged. But something was wrong. Michael noticed it immediately. His father moved slower, much slower. The confident energy he usually carried seemed diminished. His shoulders looked heavier. His face looked tired, very tired. Mary wrapped her arms around him. "Papa!" Mr. Matovu smiled and hugged her. But as he did, a violent cough escaped him. A deep cough, the kind that seemed to come from his chest. The children exchanged glances. "You okay?" Michael asked. "I'm fine." Another cough interrupted him. Irene frowned. "That doesn't sound fine. It's just a cold." "That's a terrible cold." Mr. Matovu laughed weakly. Everyone has become a doctor. But even as he joked, he couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. That evening, the family sat together for dinner, something they had all missed. Mary talked non-stop. Irene complained about cousins. Michael updated him on everything that had happened during his absence. Mr. Matovu listened happily, yet several times he stopped eating to cough. Each cough seemed worse than the last. "Papa," Mary said softly. Maybe you should go to the hospital." The old man smiled. "And let doctors steal all my money? That's not funny." He chuckled. "I'll be all right." But Michael noticed something. His father barely touched his food. And for the first time in his life, he looked old, really old. The next morning, the cough remained. By evening, a fever had joined it. 2 days later, Mr. Matovu was confined to bed. The mansion grew unusually quiet. Doctors began coming and going. Medicines filled the bedside table. Yet the fever refused to break. Michael stood outside his father's room one afternoon as a doctor emerged. The doctor's face was troubled. "Doctor?" The man looked at him. "Yes? Will he be okay?" The doctor hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to terrify Michael. "We're doing everything we can." That wasn't an answer. Michael knew it, and so did the doctor. Meanwhile, word of Mr. Matovu's illness spread through the family. Relatives began arriving daily. Some came genuinely concerned. Others came for reasons they dared not speak aloud. One evening, Musa and Godfrey sat alone in the garden, their voices low. "How bad is it?" Musa asked. Godfrey shook his head. "I don't know." Musa looked toward the mansion, toward the massive estate, the expensive vehicles, the businesses, the land, everything. "If something happens..." Godfrey immediately cut him off. "Don't. I'm only saying, don't." But Musa couldn't stop himself. For years, jealousy had lived inside him. Now temptation was feeding it. He never made a will. Godfrey froze. "What? He never made a will? How do you know that?" "I asked his lawyer years ago." Godfrey stared at him. "You asked?" Musa shrugged. "Just curiosity." But it wasn't curiosity, and they both knew it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Godfrey whispered, "The man isn't dead." Musa looked away. No. But the thought had already entered the room, and once such thoughts arrived, they rarely left. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The house felt wrong. The silence felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. He quietly entered his father's room. The lights were dim. Mr. Matovu lay asleep. Or at least he appeared to be. "Michael, that's my father." The doctor looked away. The room became chaotic. Then suddenly, silence. The machine emitted a long, continuous tone. One sound, one terrible sound, the kind heard only when life leaves a body. Everything stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The world itself seemed to freeze. The doctor slowly lowered his head. The room fell completely silent, and Michael understood. Before anyone said a word, before any explanation, before any confirmation, he understood. No. The word escaped as a whisper. The doctor looked at him sadly. I'm sorry. No. Michael shook his head. No. Tears filled his eyes. This isn't happening. Mary looked from face to face, confused, then frightened. Michael. Nobody answered her. Michael. Her voice trembled. What happened? The 17-year-old couldn't speak. His entire body shook. The doctor finally stepped forward. Your father, Mary stared, has passed away. The words hit her like a physical blow. No. She looked toward the bed. No. Then again, louder. No. She broke free from Irene and ran to the bed. Papa. Servants began crying. Doctors lowered their heads. But Mary kept shaking him. Wake up! Tears streamed down her face. Wake up! Nothing happened. Papa. Still nothing. The reality was cruel. Mr. Matovu was gone. The man who had been father and mother, provider and protector, the center of their world, gone. The funeral drew hundreds. Business associates, friends, employees, relatives. People came from every corner of the country. Stories were told. Tributes were given. Many cried openly. Few had anything bad to say about Mr. Matovu. He had built businesses, created jobs, helped countless people, and now he was gone. Yet as the children sat beside his coffin, something felt wrong. Michael noticed it first. Some relatives seemed more interested in conversations than mourning. Small groups gathered whispering. Eyes wandered toward family properties, toward business associates, toward lawyers, toward opportunity, and among them stood Musa, watching, thinking, calculating. After the burial, the mansion became unbearably quiet. No laughter, no stories, no familiar footsteps, just absence. The children sat together in the living room, the same room where they had spent years listening to their father. Mary held one of his jackets tightly, refusing to let go. It still smells like him. Nobody answered. Irene stared blankly at the floor. Michael sat silently. His father's final words echoed endlessly in his mind. Take care of your sisters. Take care of your sisters. Take care of your sisters. For the first time, the weight of those words settled on his shoulders. He was no longer just a brother. He was all they had left. Mary suddenly looked up. When is Papa coming back? The question shattered the room. Irene burst into tears. Michael felt his own eyes burn. Mary looked confused. What? Nobody could answer, because the truth was too painful. Some part of the 11-year-old still believed death was temporary, that somehow her father would walk through the door smiling, that everything would return to normal. But deep down, Michael knew something else. Normal was gone, forever, and outside the mansion gates, unseen by the grieving children, greedy eyes had already begun turning toward the empire Mr. Matovu had left behind. The tragedy of losing their father was only the beginning. A far greater betrayal was coming. The days after the funeral passed like a nightmare none of the children could wake up from. The mansion was still full. Relatives came and went. Food was prepared. Visitors filled the compound. Yet to Michael, Irene, and Mary, everything felt empty. Because the one person who mattered was gone. The laughter was gone. The stories were gone. The feeling of safety was gone. And for the first time in their lives, the three children were truly alone. The first week after the burial, Mary refused to accept reality. Every morning she woke up expecting to hear her father's voice downstairs. Every evening she waited by the gate. One afternoon, Michael found her sitting beneath the palm tree where she always read. Only this time she wasn't reading. She was staring at the entrance, waiting. Mary? She looked up. Yes? What are you doing out here? She hesitated, then whispered, waiting for Papa. The words nearly shattered him. Michael sat beside her. "Mary." He said he would come back. Her voice trembled. "He promised." The 17-year-old looked away. A painful silence settled between them. "He never breaks promises." Michael felt tears forming. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Mary looked at him. Her eyes were red, small, broken. "Why did he lie to me?" Michael immediately pulled her into his arms. "He didn't lie." "Then where is he?" The question pierced straight through his heart. She began crying. Not the loud cries from the funeral. These were worse. Quiet cries. The kind that came from a place too deep for words. "I miss him." Michael closed his eyes. "So do I. I want him back." "So do I." "I wasn't ready." Neither was he. Neither was Irene. Neither was anyone. But death had never cared about readiness. That night, Michael entered his father's bedroom for the first time since the funeral. The room remained exactly as it had been. The slippers beside the bed, the watch on the table, the reading glasses, his favorite sweater hanging behind the door. Everything was there, except him. Michael slowly sat on the edge of the bed. The scent of his father still lingered faintly, and suddenly all the strength he had been pretending to have disappeared. The tears came, uncontrollably, violently. For days he had remained strong, for Mary, for Irene, for everyone. But now he was alone, just a 17-year-old boy who had lost his father. "Dad!" His voice cracked. The word felt unfamiliar. He rarely called him that. Usually it was Papa, but tonight he felt like a little boy again. "Dad." Tears streamed down his face. "What am I supposed to do?" The room offered no answer. "I don't know how to do this." His shoulders shook. "You said take care of them." He buried his face in his hands. "I'll try." The tears kept falling. "I swear I'll try." Meanwhile, Irene was fighting her own battle. Unlike Mary, she did not cry often. Instead, she became angry. Angry at doctors, angry at relatives, angry at God, angry at the world. One evening, she sat alone on the balcony, staring into the darkness. Michael found her there. "You skipped dinner." "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten all day." "I'm not hungry." He sat beside her. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Irene finally whispered, "Do you know what I hate?" "What?" "Everyone." Michael laughed softly, the first laugh he'd managed in days. She continued staring ahead. "They keep saying the same stupid things." "What things?" "He's in a better place." She mimicked the visitors bitterly. "Be strong." Another imitation. "Time heals everything." She shook her head. "I hate it." Michael nodded. "So do I." Finally, she looked at him. For the first time, he saw tears in her eyes. Real tears. Not hidden ones. Not the ones she secretly wiped away. These were different. "I still need him." Her voice broke. "I'm only 15. Michael felt his own heart breaking. "I know. I still wanted him to see me graduate." A tear escaped. "I wanted him to walk me down the aisle one day." Another tear. "I wanted him to meet my children." The floodgates opened, and suddenly Irene was crying. The fierce, outspoken Irene. The girl who always had an answer. The girl who never backed down. Now reduced to a child mourning her father. Michael pulled her into a hug, and for the first time since they were little, Irene allowed herself to be comforted. That same night, Mary couldn't sleep. She quietly walked into Michael's room. He was still awake, staring at the ceiling. She climbed into bed beside him, just like she used to when thunderstorms scared her. Michael wrapped an arm around her. Neither spoke. A few minutes later, Irene entered. Her eyes were swollen. Without saying a word, she climbed onto the other side. The three siblings lay together, just as they had years ago after their mother died. 3 frightened children trying to survive another loss. Mary spoke first. Do you think Mama was waiting for him? The room became silent. Michael swallowed hard. I don't know. I hope she was. A tear slid down Mary's cheek, so he wouldn't be lonely. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Irene whispered, Do you think they can see us? Again silence. Finally Michael answered, I hope so. Mary nodded. I want them to know I miss them. I think they know. Another long silence followed. Then Mary asked the question neither sibling was prepared for. What happens to us now? The room became still, painfully still, because none of them had an answer. Not yet. Michael stared into the darkness. His father's final words echoed inside his mind. Take care of your sisters. Take care of your sisters. Take care of your sisters. He tightened his arms around them. No matter what happened, no matter how impossible it seemed, no matter how frightened he was, he would keep that promise. I don't know what happens next, he finally whispered. But I know one thing. His sisters listened. We stay together. Mary nodded. Irene nodded. And for a moment, surrounded by grief, uncertainty, and fear, the 3 siblings held on to each other. Unaware that outside the walls of the mansion, men they called uncles were already meeting in secret, discussing businesses, properties, bank accounts, and the future of the Matovu estate. The children believed they had already experienced the worst pain imaginable. They were wrong. The loss of their father had broken their hearts. The betrayal that was coming would break their lives. The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not announced with warning or ceremony, just a black car pulling into the driveway like any other visitor. But Michael noticed something immediately. No servants smiled, no greetings were exchanged. Even the air felt heavier. Something was wrong, very wrong. The children were called into the living room. Irene sat upright, arms folded. Mary clutched Michael's sleeve without speaking. Michael sat in the middle. He had learned by now that when adults gathered like this, it was never good news. The lawyer cleared his throat, a thin man in a grey suit. First, let me extend my deepest condolences once again for your loss. No one responded. He opened his briefcase. Paper rustled loudly in the silence. Then came the words that shattered everything. There is no registered will left behind by the late Mr. Matovu. Silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Michael blinked slowly. That's not possible. The lawyer looked up. I'm afraid it is. Michael leaned forward. No, you're wrong. Irene turned sharply. Michael. But he wasn't listening. My father would never leave without a will. He always said. The lawyer interrupted gently. I understand your grief. No, you don't understand anything. Michael stood. His chair scraped loudly. He told me himself he had prepared everything. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. There is no record. Mary's grip tightened. Michael. But his breathing had already changed. Fast, uneven. No, he said again, quieter now. He wouldn't do that to us. The lawyer hesitated. I assure you, all legal searches have been done. Nothing was found. Michael stared at him. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Because his father was careful, meticulous, organized. A man who planned business deals years ahead. A man who planned birthdays, school fees, even emergency contacts. He would not forget something like this. He would not leave them exposed. He would not, unless... Michael's voice dropped. Something is wrong. Irene stood up. Michael, sit down. No. He turned to the lawyer. Who else had access to his documents? The lawyer frowned. Only close family and legal advisors. Who exactly? Before the lawyer could answer, The door behind them opened, slowly, intentionally. Musa entered, Godfrey followed, and behind them were two more relatives Michael barely recognized. But the look on their faces told him everything. They were not here to mourn. They were here to decide. "We've discussed it," Musa said calmly. The lawyer looked at him. "Discussed what?" Godfrey stepped forward. "Since there is no will, the elders will take responsibility for the estate." Michael turned sharply. "What elders?" Musa smiled faintly. "The family elders." "That's not how it works," Irene snapped. Musa ignored her. "We will ensure everything is managed properly." Michael stepped forward. "Managed by who?" Godfrey answered. "By us." The word hit like a slap. Mary's voice trembled. "Uncle." But no one was listening anymore. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "This is highly irregular. The children are direct heirs." Musa interrupted. "They are minors. They cannot run businesses." Michael's voice sharpened. "So you can?" Silence. Then Musa spoke slowly. "We are protecting what your father built." Michael laughed bitterly. "Protecting?" Godfrey frowned. "You think this is funny?" "No," Michael said, voice shaking now. "I think this is theft." The road felt longer than anything Michael had ever known. Not because it stretched far, but because every step carried weight that had nothing to do with distance. Beside him, Mary walked silently, her small hand clinging to Irene's sleeve. None of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say, only movement, only survival. They reached their mother's relatives just before sunset, a modest home compared to what they once knew, but to them now, it looked like safety. Michael knocked. A woman opened the door and immediately frowned. "Yes?" Michael forced his voice to stay steady. It's us, Matovu's children." For a second, her expression softened, then hardened again. "Oh." She stepped outside, closing the door slightly behind her. "We heard." Irene spoke quickly. "We don't have anywhere to go. Please, just for a little while." The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry." Mary stepped forward. "Auntie, we're family." The woman sighed loudly. "Family? Child, do you know how many people are in this house already?" Michael clenched his jaw. "We won't stay long, just until we figure something out." A long pause. Then the woman shook her head again. "No, we cannot manage more mouths." Silence. Mary's lips trembled. Irene turned her face away. Michael nodded slowly. "I understand." But his voice didn't sound like understanding. It sounded like something breaking. They were turned away. Just like that. The second relative's home was worse. They didn't even open the gate fully. A man stood behind it, arms crossed. "We already have our own problems." Michael swallowed. "Uncle, please." "I said no." Irene stepped forward. "You didn't even listen." The man laughed bitterly. "Listen? We're struggling ourselves. Go back to where you came from." Mary began crying quietly. Michael pulled her close. "Let's go." Irene stared at the gate in disbelief. "They are serious?" Michael didn't answer, because the truth was worse. They were serious, and they were done. By nightfall, the children had nowhere left to go. No home, no relatives willing to help, no father, only darkness. They found shelter in an unfinished building on the edge of the slum, concrete walls without windows, an open roof that showed the cold sky. Mary sat on the ground, hugging her knees. "I'm scared," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I know." Irene looked around. "This is where we sleep?" Michael removed his jacket and placed it on the floor. "Yes." Silence followed. Mary looked at the open space. "What if it rains?" Michael glanced up at the sky. "Then we get wet." That answer said everything. That night, they shared a single piece of cloth they found near a dumpster. It smelled faintly of dust and smoke. Mary slept between them. Irene curled up tightly. Michael did not lie down. He sat against the wall, eyes open, watching, always watching. "Michael," Irene whispered. "Yes?" "Sleep." "I am." "You're not." He didn't respond, because she was right. He couldn't sleep, not when every sound outside could mean danger, not when his sisters had nothing, not when everything depended on him. A shadow moved outside the building at midnight. Michael stood instantly. A bottle clinked somewhere in the dark. Footsteps. He stepped forward slowly. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the footsteps retreated. He stayed awake until morning. At dawn, the slum came alive. People moved everywhere. The smell of smoke, noise of vendors, children running barefoot. Life continues despite everything. Michael stood and stretched his stiff body. "I need work." Irene looked up. "What kind of work?" "Any work." That was the beginning. The first job was carrying water containers from a borehole. Heavy jerry cans, long distances, back-breaking work. Men twice his age laughed when he struggled. "You're too soft for this," one said. Michael didn't respond. He just kept going, because softness had no place in survival. At the end of the day, he earned barely enough for food, but he brought it home, and that was what mattered. The next job was carrying cement at a construction site. His hands bled by the third day. The foreman looked at him suspiciously. "You're just a boy." "I can work. You won't last." "I will." And he did. By the second week, Michael's body had changed. His shoulders hardened, his hands cracked, his face lost its softness, but he never stopped. Every coin he earned went straight to food, to Mary, to Irene, to survival. Irene refused to remain idle. The road felt longer than anything Michael had ever known, not because it stretched far, but because every step carried weight that had nothing to do with distance. Beside him, Mary walked silently, her small hand clinging to Irene's sleeve. None of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say, only movement, only survival. They reached their mother's relatives just before sunset. A modest home compared to what they once knew, but to them now, it looked like safety. Michael knocked. A woman opened the door and immediately frowned. "Yes?" Michael forced his voice to stay steady. It's us, Matovu's children." For a second, her expression softened, then hardened again. "Oh." She stepped outside, closing the door slightly behind her. "We heard." Irene spoke quickly. "We don't have anywhere to go. Please, just for a little while." The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry." Mary stepped forward. "Auntie, we're family." The woman sighed loudly. "Family? Child, do you know how many people are in this house already?" Michael clenched his jaw. "We won't stay long, just until we figure something out." A long pause. Then the woman shook her head again. "No, we cannot manage more mouths." Silence. Mary's lips trembled. Irene turned her face away. Michael nodded slowly. "I understand." But his voice didn't sound like understanding. It sounded like something breaking. They were turned away. Just like that. The second relative's home was worse. They didn't even open the gate fully. A man stood behind it, arms crossed. "We already have our own problems." Michael swallowed. "Uncle, please." "I said no." Irene stepped forward. "You didn't even listen." The man laughed bitterly. "Listen? We're struggling ourselves. Go back to where you came from." Mary began crying quietly. Michael pulled her close. "Let's go." Irene stared at the gate in disbelief. "They are serious?" Michael didn't answer, because the truth was worse. They were serious, and they were done. By nightfall, the children had nowhere left to go. No home, no relatives willing to help, no father. Only darkness. They found shelter in an unfinished building on the edge of the slum, concrete walls without windows, an open roof that showed the cold sky. Mary sat on the ground, hugging her knees. "I'm scared," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I know." Irene looked around. "This is where we sleep?" Michael removed his jacket and placed it on the floor. "Yes." Silence followed. Mary looked at the open space. "What if it rains?" Michael glanced up at the sky. "Then we get wet." That answer said everything. That night, they shared a single piece of cloth they found near a dumpster. It smelled faintly of dust and smoke. Mary slept between them. Irene curled up tightly. Michael did not lie down. He sat against the wall, eyes open, watching, always watching. "Michael," Irene whispered. "Yes?" "Sleep." "I am." "You're not." He didn't respond, because she was right. He couldn't sleep. Not when every sound outside could mean danger. Not when his sisters had nothing. Not when everything depended on him. A shadow moved outside the building at midnight. Michael stood instantly. A bottle clinked somewhere in the dark. Footsteps. He stepped forward slowly. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the footsteps retreated. He stayed awake until morning. At dawn, the slum came alive. People moved everywhere. The smell of smoke, noise of vendors, children running barefoot. Life continues despite everything. Michael stood and stretched his stiff body. "I need work." Irene looked up. "What kind of work?" "Any work." That was the beginning. The first job was carrying water containers from a borehole. Heavy jerry cans, long distances, back-breaking work. Men twice his age laughed when he struggled. "You're too soft for this," one said. Michael didn't respond. He just kept going, because softness had no place in survival. At the end of the day, he earned barely enough for food, but he brought it home, and that was what mattered. The next job was carrying cement at a construction site. His hands bled by the third day. The foreman looked at him suspiciously. "You're just a boy." "I can work. You won't last." "I will." And he did. By the second week, Michael's body had changed. His shoulders hardened, his hands cracked. His face lost its softness, but he never stopped. Every coin he earned went straight to food, to Mary, to Irene, to survival. Irene refused to remain idle. Barely standing, leaking roof, but it had walls, a door, and a lock. They moved in, all three of them, sharing one mattress, one blanket, one life. That night, Mary whispered, "This is our home?" Michael nodded. "Yes. It's small. I know. But it's ours?" Michael paused, then nodded again. "Yes." Mary smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. "Then I like it." Irene turned away so they wouldn't see her tears. But Michael still did not sleep, even in the small room, even with a roof, even with his sisters beside him. He sat awake most nights, listening, counting sounds, thinking, planning, remembering, because in his mind one thing kept repeating. His father did not die for them to live like this, and someone, somewhere, had taken everything. And Michael Matovu was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to understand something far more dangerous than poverty. He was beginning to understand injustice. 5 years passed, 5 long years of dust, sweat, hunger, and sacrifice. 5 years of surviving one day at a time. The mansion on the hill had become nothing more than a distant memory. The expensive cars, the private schools, the servants, the luxury, all gone. Life had taught the Matovu children lessons money never could, and no one had changed more than Michael. At 22, he looked older than his age. The boy who had once worn polished school shoes now wore worn-out sandals and work-stained clothes. His hands were rough, his shoulders broad, His face carried the quiet seriousness of a man who had spent years carrying burdens too heavy for his age. Yet, despite everything, he had kept his promise. His sisters were still in school. One afternoon, Michael stood proudly in front of a tiny wooden kiosk. The structure was hardly impressive. Corrugated iron sheets formed the roof. The paint was fading. The shelves were uneven. But to Michael, it was beautiful, because it belonged to him. A small drinks kiosk, sodas, water, juice, a few snacks, nothing fancy. But it was his first real business, not someone else's work, not carrying cement, not making bricks, not fetching water, his own. He smiled as he arranged bottles on the shelf. A familiar voice interrupted him. "You've rearranged those bottles 6 times. Michael looked up. Irene, now 20 years old, still sharp-tongued, still clever, still impossible. He laughed. 7 times. Exactly my point. She sat beside him. "You make me proud." Mary smiled. "You sound like Papa." The words struck all 3 siblings. Silence followed. Not painful silence, just longing, the kind that never truly disappeared. As business slowly improved, Michael began spending more time at the market. That was where he first noticed Sarah, not because she was the most beautiful girl there, though she was certainly attractive. It was something else. Confidence. She carried herself differently, like someone who had survived storms. Her 2 small shops sat 2 stalls away from his kiosk. Every morning she opened before everyone else. Every evening she closed after everyone else. And unlike most people, she never complained. One afternoon, Michael watched her argue with a supplier. The man shook his head. "That's my final price." Sarah crossed her arms. "No." The supplier laughed. "No, no. You need these goods, and you need my money." The man stared. Sarah stared back. Neither moved. Finally, the supplier groaned. "Fine." Sarah smiled. "I knew you'd see reason." Michael couldn't help laughing. Sarah immediately turned. "What?" "Nothing. You were eavesdropping." "I wasn't." "You were." Michael smiled. "Maybe a little." Sarah rolled her eyes, then surprisingly smiled back. It was the first conversation they ever had. A few days later, rain poured heavily across the slum. Most customers disappeared. Business slowed. Michael sat inside his kiosk, staring at nearly empty streets. Suddenly, someone appeared carrying an umbrella. Sarah. She handed him a cup. "Tea." Michael blinked. "For me?" "No, for the ghost behind you." He laughed. "Thank you." She sat beside him. For several minutes they watched the rain together. Then Sarah spoke. "You work too much." Michael nearly choked. "Excuse me. It's true. I have responsibilities." "So do I." "Did you understand?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I do." The confidence in her voice disappeared briefly. For the first time, Michael saw sadness. Real sadness. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked at the rain. "My mother left when I was 7. Michael remained silent. "My father drank himself to death." A bitter smile appeared. "So it was mostly me." The words sounded familiar, too familiar. Michael nodded. "My father died too." Sarah looked at him. The smile vanished. "I didn't know. Most people don't." Something shifted between them. Understanding, not pity, not sympathy. Understanding. The kind only pain creates. Over the next few months, they became friends, then best friends. Sarah often visited the kiosk, sometimes to help, sometimes just to talk. One evening, she watched Michael count profits. A smile appeared. "What?" She pointed at the notebook. "That's your problem." "My notebook?" "No." She leaned closer. "You're thinking." Michael frowned. "What are you talking about?" Sarah pointed toward the kiosk. You think this is the destination. It isn't? No. It's a business. It's the beginning. Michael stared. Sarah continued. You act like surviving is enough. It has to be. No. Her voice became firm. You didn't fight all these years just to survive. Michael looked away. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this. Nobody. You think too small. The words stung. Easy for you to say. No. She shook her head. Easy for me to ignore. What do you mean? Sarah pointed toward the market. You see a kiosk. She pointed further. I see a shop. Then further. I see a chain of shops. Michael laughed. You're dreaming. Sarah smiled. No. She tapped his chest. You are. He looked confused. You've forgotten how. The words lingered long after she left. That night Michael couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, not because of hunger, not because of responsibility. For the first time in years, something else kept him awake. Hope. Because Sarah had planted a dangerous idea inside him. The possibility that his life could become more than survival, that perhaps he was meant for something greater. And as he stared at the ceiling of their tiny rented room, Michael found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. Not the next day, not next week, the future. And somewhere deep inside him, a dream that had been buried beneath years of suffering slowly began to wake up. A dream that looked very much like the one his father once carried. The dream Sarah planted in Michael's heart refused to die. For months, they discussed ideas. Every evening after business, they sat outside their small shops, notebooks spread between them. People laughed when they saw them. What are those two planning now? Probably becoming millionaires. The neighbors would laugh. Sarah never cared. Neither did Michael. One evening she pointed at a page filled with calculations. We can do this. Michael studied the figures. We barely have enough savings. Exactly. He looked confused. Sarah smiled. If we wait until we're comfortable, we'll never grow. Michael laughed. You always sound crazy. And yet I'm always right. He rolled his eyes. Debatable. Sarah pointed at the notebook. Trust me. Michael looked at her. For some reason he always did. Okay. That single word changed everything. They combined their savings, every coin, every note, every sacrifice, everything they had worked for. It was the biggest risk either had ever taken. The first few months were terrifying. Some days business was slow. Some days customers were few. Some nights Michael lay awake wondering if they had made a mistake, but Sarah never allowed doubt to stay long. One evening she found him staring at the sales book. What's wrong? What if we fail? Sarah sat beside him. Michael. Do you remember sleeping in unfinished buildings? He nodded. Do you remember carrying cement? Another nod. Do you remember going hungry? His eyes lowered. Yes. Sarah smiled. Then what exactly are you afraid of? Michael looked at her. The answer hit him instantly. Nothing, because they had already survived the worst life could offer. The business grew, slowly, then steadily, then unexpectedly fast. One shop became two became four became six. Soon they were supplying drinks across several neighborhoods, and what started as shops began a supply chain company for small businesses. Michael could hardly believe it. Every time he looked at the company records, he remembered the boy who once carried water containers for a few coins. Sometimes it felt unreal. One afternoon, Irene arrived from university carrying exciting news. She burst into Michael's office without knocking. Michael, he looked up. What happened? She grinned. I got it. Got what? The internship. Michael stood immediately. What internship? The one at Cato, Kintu and Partners. His eyes widened. The biggest law firm in the city. You got it? I got it. Michael laughed loudly. Before Irene could react, he hugged her. She groaned. Stop. No. People are watching. I don't care. Irene tried to look annoyed, but her smile betrayed her. You did it, Irene. Her eyes softened. No. She pointed at him. We did. A few weeks later, another celebration followed. Mary had been accepted into university, civil engineering, the dream she had carried since childhood, the dream she once defended while reading old newspapers in the slums, the dream everyone laughed at. Now it was real. That evening, the siblings sat together eating dinner, a luxury they rarely enjoyed because everyone was busy. Mary smiled shyly. I still can't believe it. Michael looked at her. I can. She laughed. No, seriously. I am serious. He pointed at her. You were building bridges in your imagination when you were 11. The table erupted with laughter. Mary covered her face. Michael, it's true. Irene joined in. Remember when she tried drawing engine designs on our walls? Mary groaned. I was practicing. You nearly got us evicted. Everyone laughed again. For the first time in many years, their laughter carried no pain, only gratitude. Meanwhile, another miracle was quietly unfolding. Michael had fallen deeply in love. The realization came one evening while watching Sarah close one of their stores. She was tired, sweaty, complaining about suppliers, yet somehow beautiful. The kind of beauty that had nothing to do with appearance. The kind built from strength, loyalty, character. The kind his father would have admired. And suddenly, Michael knew. He wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. A month later, he took Sarah to a quiet hill overlooking the city. The same city that had once watched them lose everything. The same city where they had rebuilt themselves. Sarah noticed how nervous he looked. You scratched your ear 3 times. Michael froze. What? She laughed. You're nervous. Maybe. Why? He took a deep breath, then slowly reached into his pocket. Sarah's eyes widened. Oh, Michael smiled. Oh, you're serious. Very. For a moment, he simply looked at her, thinking of everything. The struggles, the victories, the friendship, the love. Sarah. Her eyes became emotional. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. A tear appeared. You reminded me how to dream. Another tear followed. You became my best friend. His voice shook, and I don't want to imagine life without you. He got down on one knee. Will you marry me? Sarah covered her mouth. For once in her life, words abandoned her. She nodded, then laughed through tears, then nodded again. Yes. Michael smiled. Yes? Yes. The city below continued moving, unaware that 2 broken people had just promised each other forever. The wedding took place months later. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, just family, friends, people who genuinely loved them. When Sarah walked down the aisle, Michael thought of his father. For a brief moment, he imagined him standing beside him, smiling proudly. The thought nearly made him cry. 2 years later, life looked completely different. The business had expanded beyond anything Michael once imagined. They now owned multiple stores and distribution units. Employees worked under them. Profits grew every year. For the first time, the Matovu siblings knew stability. Real stability. Not the fragile kind built on inheritance, the kind built through sweat. The biggest change came when Michael finally moved his sisters into a spacious flat. It wasn't a mansion, not even close, but compared to where they had come from, it felt like a palace. Mary walked from room to room in disbelief. There are 3 bedrooms. Michael laughed. Yes. 3. I can count. She stared at him. We each get one. That's usually how 3 bedrooms work. Mary nearly cried. Irene quietly wiped her eyes. Neither sibling forgot the nights they shared one mattress. Neither forgot the leaking roof. Neither forgot the hunger. A few weeks later, Michael found himself standing somewhere he had avoided for years, a cemetery. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the trees. Birds chirped softly, and before him stood a simple gravestone, Mr. Matovu. For several moments, Michael simply stared. The years disappeared. Suddenly he was 17 again, scared, lost, heartbroken. His throat tightened. Hello, Papa. Silence. The wind answered. Michael smiled weakly. I know. He looked down. It's been a long time. His eyes filled with tears. I should have come sooner. The emotions became overwhelming. He knelt beside the grave. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then finally the words came. We made it. His voice cracked. We really made it. Tears rolled down his face. Irene is interning at the biggest law firm in the city. A small laugh escaped him. She's still stubborn. He wiped his eyes. Mary is studying civil engineering. His smile grew. She never stopped believing. The tears continued. And me. He looked toward the sky. I got married. A long silence followed. Her name is Sarah. He laughed softly. You would have liked her. The wind rustled through the trees. Michael closed his eyes. I kept my promise. Take care of your sisters. The words echoed in his heart. I wasn't perfect. His voice trembled. I made mistakes. Another tear fell. I got scared. Another. There were days I wanted to give up. His shoulders shook. But I remembered you. He placed a hand on the gravestone. I hope you're proud of us. The cemetery remained silent, yet somehow Michael felt peace, as if somewhere beyond this world, his father was smiling. Not because of the money, not because of the businesses, not because of success, but because the children he loved had become good people, exactly as he and their mother once hoped. And for the first time since the day he died, Michael walked away from his father's grave feeling whole. The promise had been worth it. 10 years. 10 years since 3 children had walked out of their father's mansion with nothing but the clothes on their backs. 10 years since they had slept in unfinished buildings. 10 years since hunger, humiliation, and uncertainty became their daily companions. And now, standing on the balcony of his mansion overlooking the city skyline, Michael Matovu could hardly recognize the life he was living. The evening breeze blew gently across the compound. Below him, workers were tending to the gardens. Inside, Sarah was laughing with guests, and somewhere upstairs, a room had already been prepared for the baby that would soon join their family. A child who would never know hunger, never know homelessness, never know what it felt like to be abandoned by the world. Michael smiled. Life had come full circle. A voice interrupted his thoughts. You're hiding again. Michael turned. Sarah stood in the doorway holding a glass of juice. Her pregnancy was now impossible to hide. She walked slowly toward him. I wasn't hiding. You always say that. Because it's true. Sarah laughed. Everyone is looking for you. Michael accepted the glass. I needed a moment. Her expression softened. You were thinking about your father again. It wasn't a question. It never needed to be. Michael smiled. Am I that obvious? To me? She slipped her hand into his. Always. Inside the mansion, another celebration was taking place. Mary had returned home for a short visit. At 26, she had become everything she once dreamed of being. After graduating with distinction in civil engineering, the government had awarded her a prestigious scholarship to continue her studies abroad. Now she was working alongside some of the best engineering minds in the world. Yet she remained the same gentle girl who once read books beneath a tree. Only now she was helping design solutions that would improve lives across the country. Meanwhile, Irene had become a force of nature. Her name was known in courtrooms throughout the country. Judges respected her. Opponents feared her. Clients sought her out months in advance. Newspapers called her ruthless. Some called her aggressive. Only memories. Painful ones. They've been charged. Michael frowned. Charged with what? Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of assets. The room fell silent. Irene continued. The investigation finally concluded. Michael leaned back in his chair. And? The evidence was overwhelming. For a moment, nobody spoke. The weight of the words settled over the room. Years of lies, years of stolen wealth, years of deception, finally exposed. Mary broke the silence. What about father's lawyer? Irene nodded. Him too. The answer wasn't surprising, not anymore. All of them had long suspected the truth. The will had never simply disappeared. Someone had made it disappear. Michael stared quietly at the table. His emotions surprised him. There was no satisfaction, no joy, no excitement, just calm. Eventually he asked, what happens now? They're facing serious prison sentences. Sarah squeezed Michael's hand beneath the table. Irene continued. The courts have also ordered the recovery of remaining assets connected to father's estate. Mary's eyes widened. How much is left? Not much. Years of greed had consumed most of it. Properties sold, businesses ruined, money squandered. The empire Mr. Matovu built had been destroyed long ago. Still, some pieces remained, enough to matter, enough to recover. Then Irene hesitated, something Michael immediately noticed. What? She sighed. They want to see you. Michael stared. Who? Our uncles. The answer hung heavily in the room. They've been asking repeatedly. Sarah frowned. Why? Irene laughed bitterly. They want forgiveness. Silence followed. Then another. Finally Mary spoke softly. What did they say? Irene's voice hardened. They said they made mistakes. Michael almost smiled. Mistakes. What a small word for so much destruction. They said greed blinded them. Nobody responded. They want a chance to apologize. The room grew quiet once more. Everyone looked at Michael, waiting. Michael slowly stood from his chair, then walked toward the large window overlooking the city where everything had happened, the city that had witnessed their fall and their rise. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, he spoke. Do you remember the unfinished building? Mary nodded immediately. The one where we slept? Yes. Michael looked out at the lights. I used to stay awake all night. His voice remained calm. Watching over you two. Neither sister spoke. I was terrified. The admission surprised them. Michael rarely discussed those years. I was 17. He smiled sadly. I had no idea what I was doing. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Michael continued. I hated them for a long time. Everyone knew who he meant. Our uncles. His voice remained steady. I hated them for taking our home, for taking our childhood, for taking father's legacy. A long silence followed. Then he looked at his sisters. But if they hadn't? Irene frowned. What do you mean? Michael smiled. If they hadn't done what they did. His eyes moved between them. Would you be the woman you are today? Irene remained silent. He turned toward Mary. Would you? Mary lowered her gaze, then toward Sarah. And would I have met her? Sarah smiled softly. Michael nodded. I spent years carrying that anger. His eyes became emotional, but somewhere along the way I stopped. Another pause, because I realized something. What? Mary whispered. Michael smiled. They already lost. The room became silent. They lost their families, their dignity, their freedom, their peace. He shook his head, and none of that was because of us. It was because of their own choices. Irene folded her arms. So you're not going to see them? Michael looked out toward the darkness beyond the city, then slowly shook his head. No, not even once. No. Why? Michael smiled gently. Because for the first time in years he understood the answer. I already closed that chapter. Silence, then he continued. I forgave them a long time ago. Everyone looked surprised, but forgiveness doesn't always require a meeting. His eyes drifted toward the family gathered around the table, toward Sarah, toward Mary, toward Irene, toward the life they had built. I have everything I need. His voice softened, and I don't want to spend another day living in the past. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael stood alone on the balcony. Above him, the stars stretched endlessly across the sky. He thought about his father, about his mother, about the promise he made all those years ago. Take care of your sisters. A smile touched his lips. He had done more than that. They all had, together. And somewhere in the quiet darkness, Michael felt a familiar peace settle over him. Justice had finally arrived. Not because the guilty were punished, but because the children they tried to destroy had flourished. The orphan boy had become a husband and soon a father. The little girl who sold sweets had become one of the nation's finest lawyers. The shy child who read books by candlelight had become an engineer changing the world. The Matovu children had won, not through revenge, not through hatred, not through bitterness, but through perseverance, through love, through sacrifice. And as Michael gazed at the stars, he imagined his parents watching, smiling, proud, at last. The story of loss had become a story of triumph, and the promise made by a frightened 17-year-old boy had finally been fulfilled.